This is Fragmented, an Android developer podcast where we talk about building good software and becoming better Android developers. I'm Don Felker.
And I'm Kaushik Gopal.
Welcome to the show.
All right, folks. Welcome to our 250th show. Don, it's been a minute since we last chatted, but we wanted to jump on and record this episode as it's long been overdue.
Yeah, this 250th mark is quite important in many reasons, especially for me, which I don't think I've ever even told you about. Mm-hmm. And that's just to give a little backstory. Like, I've been listening to podcasts for going on 20 years now. And when I started back in 2006, I used to listen to .NET Rocks and Scott Hanselman's like Hanselman at podcast. And at one point, Scott Hanselman, I think he was in like his early like 10s or 15, episode 15 or 16. He was interviewing someone else from another podcast called ArcCast, and it was Ron Jacobs, who used to run a podcast. And he said Ron is, very prolific, and he's got, he's over 250 episodes. And I remember hearing that over about 20 years ago, thinking, wow, 250 episodes. That is wild. And to know that we have made it this far and have sat on the opposing sides of each other close to 250 times is amazing. So I've really enjoyed the journey, and I'm glad that I've been on it with you.
And a lot of kind listeners have reached out and wondered what's going on. And we've always said, hey, we're on a hiatus because we are truly trying to figure this out, right? We're trying to figure out what the next step is. We have some big announcements for the future of the show. Both of us do. I'd love for you to maybe go first, if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess I'll just cut right to the chase. This episode 250, will be the last episode in which I will be a host here on Fragmented. And I think that requires quite a bit of explaining, so I'm going to go on a little bit of a monologue here to explain kind of how we got to where we're at. It kind of starts back, which I don't think I've talked about this really a lot, is where I got my start in Android. People know I just started really early on. Android came out, and the first device was released, I believe it was October of 2008. It was the T-Mobile G1. At the time, I was consulting, doing web development and .NET and Microsoft technologies, though I had a lot of experience with other Linux technologies too. But I had got my hands on that phone because back then you had the Sidekick, and that one of those had broke, and got a T-Mobile G1, so first Android phone. I had learned Java in college, and at that point I said, hey, I would like to try to write an app. I was consulting, I was on the bench, which means you're not doing anything, so I wanted to learn something new. And I learned how to write an Android app. And what this was a vehicle for me to kill time. I didn't have a goal to make anything significant. It was just to learn something new so I could have another skill that my consulting firm could offer clients. I wanted to be valuable to the company that I was at, and so it was a vehicle for that. What ended up happening was something completely unexpected. But what this gets back to is, you're going to hear me say this a lot, the word vehicle. And Android has been a vehicle in my life we're going on 2025? We're going on 14, 15 years now. And what ended up happening is I created a bunch of soundboard apps and so forth, all kinds of them. And I ended up throwing some ads on there, and then something ended up happening. I ended up making a decent amount of money from these ads. I had at one point in the first few months, because this was early in the Android ecosystem, there was less than 1,000 apps, and you put an app out there, people were just hungry. Apps were a new thing. Like, this was a whole new, this is the Wild West. People would install anything and just try it out. And so mine were just purely entertainment for fun, setting ringtone and notification sounds. And I had over 20 million installs within a few months. And I threw ads on there, started making money. And this was fun because I got to experience user support. I got to build apps. I got to do things. And then when they started making money, it became a business. And I've always ran businesses of some sort. I always had some type of side hustle. I was always building something. I always was doing something. Even from my youngest years, I've been building something. Back to when I was 8 years old, selling painted rocks at the post office for money. always been entrepreneurial. And so this was a new venture for me. So I formed another company, and Android was the vehicle for me to start a business. And I did that on the side while I worked full time until a bunch of stuff came around and I had to shut the apps down, which is another story. But that created an opportunity for me to just go out and start speaking about it. Now, speaking is something I always wanted to do, speaking at user groups, and I've always loved helping people. And so I always had a big goal of just doing some public speaking. And I'd done a couple of public speaking engagements before, but this one gave me a new opportunity because this was a new technology. And a lot of people were interested in it, and people just wanted to learn about it. And so it was really fun to teach. It was really fun to just do the 101 of Android development. So I started speaking anywhere I could, local user groups, regional user groups, national user groups, conferences, wherever. I did it for free. It was a blast. I had fun. But again, Android was the vehicle here. It was the vehicle. I didn't go to search out saying, I love Android so much I want to talk about it. It was like, hey, I'm good at this. It's fun to talk to people about things, and Android's just the vehicle. And so I did that. Shortly thereafter, because I'd been doing that so much, I've been blogging about it, writing about it, and stuff like that, an opportunity came from a publisher. They just emailed me and said, hey, our author basically had to drop out for personal reasons. We're looking for someone to pick up a book. This is the Dummies brand. Looking for someone to write the first book on Android application development for dummies. Do you have any interest? We've heard your name tossed around a lot in the industry because all the talks and writing you've done about it. What do you think? I've always had, since for as long as I could remember, a bucket list item for my life to write a book. And it didn't matter if that book was about fitness or health or woodworking or whatever. So I was like, yeah, I'm in. I always wanted to write a book. So again, Android was just the vehicle for allowing me to accomplish a goal. And that's kind of the theme we're seeing here. So as time progressed, I've always been trying to work remotely. I've pushed for remote. I've always had clients remotely, but never a full-time gig remotely at the time. I always had part-time things. So as writing this book, I had to submit a pull request for some library I was using. It was using an intent service thing, and I submitted a pull request. This was actually before pull requests were around. It was from Mercurial. Anyway, I pushed this up, and little lo and behold did I know that the person who ran this library was the only engineer on the Android platform at Groupon. This was when Groupon was very small. I think the team was like 10 engineers. It was very, very tiny. And that included iOS, Android, and backend. It was very tiny. And at that time, I spoke to that person. They needed help. His name was Michael Burton. He actually ended up taking over the second and third editions of my book because I didn't want to write them anymore. And he said, hey, I need some help over here at Groupon. Do you have any interest? I like your work already. This is great. Let me know. And I was like, yeah, but I can't move. And he goes, no. He goes, no, we're 100% remote. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, here's my rate. And I was like, they're not going to take this. And we're like, all right. He's like, cool, sounds good. When can you start? I was like, whoa. So all of a sudden, now I had this remote job. Again, Android was just the vehicle. I didn't try to use Android to get there. It just happened. It was the vehicle that facilitated these goals to happen. And so I worked there. That allowed me to work at other startups because of just the network that I had created. And eventually it turned into multiple, people that I met at that position turned into the reason why I was at MyFitnessPal very early. It turned into the reason why I was at the Point Payment Terminal. It turned into the reason why I've been a lot of places. And so again, Android was just the vehicle. It was never something I sought out to be like, I want to be a mobile developer. And that was never the case. It was just, I like building things. I have these goals. And it just happened to be that Android facilitated me in the ability to accomplish these goals. The next was this podcast. In 2015, you reached out to me to start a podcast and wondering if I was interested. Mm-hmm. I was very interested. I've always wanted to start a podcast. And I'd been a big podcast consumer for many years, and this was something I wanted to do. So again, Android was the vehicle for me to have a podcast, and I got to do it with you, and it's been a fantastic experience. Thank you very much, and I'm forever grateful to have gone on this journey with you. And we had a great time with it. It was a lot of mutual respect, and we really worked well together. And that's how the podcast kind of came to be. But I never thought like, hey, I am going to have a goal to start an Android podcast. No, it's just like, I would want a podcast. Again, could be about health, could be about woodworking, could be about gardening. I don't know. But it ended up being about Android. That led me a couple months later to starting Caster, which was an online training company I ran for about 6 or 7 years. And during this whole time I'm doing this, I'm still building business on the side. I built some gym management software in Ruby on Rails. I built some landscaping, like Uber for a landscaping company. I built a handful of other things. I tried some other apps. All these were endeavors of me building a business and just being entrepreneurial. So at this time, I'm like, all right, these other ventures didn't work out. Like, what can I sell, or what do I have the potential to sell that might take off? And I'm like, well, who's my audience? And I'm like, I have a big Android audience. I'm like, is there anything that they might be interested in purchasing from me? And I thought maybe they'd be interested in like high quality technical training that dives deep into complicated topics. And I thought to myself, well, let me try it. I'll put out 10 episodes and see what happens. And so that's how Caster started. I just put out highly produced episodes and I threw it behind a paywall. And I thought to myself, let's see what happens. And I still remember when the first transaction came in. I just looked. It was somebody I didn't know. His name's Ernest. Ernest, if you're still listening, thank you very much. For those of you who don't know, I eventually gave Ernest a lifetime subscription to the business, to the platform for free because he was the first customer. And he like inspired me to just keep going, because there's a magical feeling, and this is an entrepreneurial sense, there's a magical feeling when money just shows up and you don't know the person that purchased it. It's like, welcome to business. It's an amazing feeling. So anyway, I created this business based around Android development, helped build it up, had over 30 people working on it at one point. And this, again, exposed me to a larger network. I was able to do consulting continually. Again, Android was just the vehicle for that business. Android was the vehicle for me to work remotely. Android was the vehicle for me to continue consulting independently. Android was the vehicle for me to speak and everything. I continued to write a couple of books, follow-ups. Like I did a book on Android tablet development, and then I did another follow-up. I helped write a chapter for a Android development tools book. And eventually I got to the point, I'm like, all right, I wrote the books. I don't have anything else to say. And that's when I transitioned away from writing the Android books, because that goal had been accomplished. And that's kind of what I'm getting at here is the last few years, we've tried a few things. We have moved over to a software-based podcast where we've always been Android. But me and you do a lot of stuff. And so like, let's try talking about other stuff. And it didn't really resonate with the audience. The audience is mainly an Android audience. And that's what people come listen to us for. And so we said, all right, we got to go back to where our roots are at, and that's Android. And then I had to think about it, and I said, do I have anything here that I want to do? Like, I would have helped build a successful podcast. I've helped build a business around it. I have Android has been the vehicle of success for me for all kinds of personal goals. But again, I never searched out Android to be that. It just happened to be the vehicle. I do enjoy many aspects of Android development, and there are many things I do not enjoy whatsoever and would not be upset if I never touched them again. What I do view Android is a tool. It's the same way that I view iOS. It's the same way that I view web technologies such as Ruby on Rails or .NET or whatever. You have PHP, whatever it is. Rust, Golang, whatever you have it. TypeScript, JavaScript. They're tools. They're in a toolbox and they're tools. And I work with all kinds of tools, and I want to talk about all kinds of tools, and I want to talk about the sales and the marketing and the growing the business. And I realized that Android has given me so much and has been the vehicle for me to accomplish many goals in my life. But at this time, it's time for me to say, thanks for all the fish. It's time for me to embark on my next adventure. And this time around, I think it'll be without Android. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to stop using Android. My full-time job is developing a very popular Android app on a team. I actually run Jumpstart Android, which is the native Android solution for Ruby on Rails Hotwire-based apps, which there's another update coming out soon for that. So I'll still be doing that. I am in the middle of releasing my own personal fitness timer app. So I will still be doing Android, but again, it's just a tool in my toolbox, and I'll be kind of moving on from there. So that's kind of not the elevator pitch, it's the long explanation of like how we got from the origin story of me and Android to this point in time right now, episode 250, me saying thank you everybody, thank you for listening, thank you for going on this journey with me. But now it's finally time for me to embark on my next adventure. And so that is what it is. Again, thanks everybody for joining me. So I don't know if I'll let you have it. I'll open it up to you if you have any questions.
Oof. Thanks, Don. Thanks for sharing that. Even as you say it, I mean, obviously we've talked about a lot of this. My stomach did sink a little in some ways, because you're right. We've done this for so long, and I just want to say I've cherished every single conversation, right? And even though I don't think we've disagreed on too many things, but your ability to respectfully challenge both my opinions and vice versa, how open you are to it as a concept, has kept both our friendship and partnership going on strong, right? And I think even with Fragmented, we always started with that premise, if you remember, right? We want to have honest and open conversations. We don't want to necessarily say something that'll please a certain audience. It's just like, look, we are in this with everyone else, just like every other Android developer. How do we feel about this technology? How do we work on this? How does this work for us? Or maybe it doesn't work for us. What are the problems? It's always been what Fragmented has been about. Thank you for sharing. And as you were going down memory lane, it also made me feel, it's that bittersweet nostalgia, because I can even at that point remember and I can think about our timeline. I'm like, oh yeah, that's when that happened.
I know exactly where I was sitting when I got your email. I still can visualize it where I read. I was like, oh wow, this guy wants to start a podcast. This is kind of cool. All right, yeah, maybe let's do it. I remember exactly where I was at in Scottsdale, Arizona, this co-working place.
It's funny. I remember the first time we met, and I think I've told this even in Fragmented before. The first thing I literally told you in person was, "Damn, you're a tall dude."
I get that everywhere I go. Yeah, I've really, and I want to tell you, I've really enjoyed the podcast with you. I don't think there's anyone else I could have ever done it with. This was just such an enjoyable experience.
It means a lot, man.
Consider you a very good friend, and still do consider you a very good friend. I think that's something I want people to know too, is the reason why I'm stepping away is just for me to go on to the next journey. And this has nothing to do with any relationship between Kaushik and I. Kaushik and I are still good friends. We still talk all the time offline, through DMs or text message or whatever. So this has been great. Thank you for supporting, me and this podcast and the community for the last number of years. So that's kind of where I'm at.
I would love for you to give us how we can reach out and see some of the things. If people just want to track what's going on, and the projects that you're working on, I'd love to post some of those links so people can keep following.
Yeah, right at the end, let's talk about those things. But I have a question for you. This doesn't mean that Fragmented is over. This just means it's time for me to step aside to let it evolve. So I am passing the reins to you, and I trust that you're going to do a fantastic job with it. I know that you will. So what's next?
That brings me to my big announcement. Like you said, Fragmented is going to continue on. It's going to evolve probably a lot. I like the word that you said, evolve, there. As I took some time to recharge and reflect when we had this hiatus, I realized a few things about the Android landscape too. Firstly, when we started out, there wasn't any other there was maybe just one other podcast, right? There just wasn't enough content. And I think that's changed today. There's an abundance of content out there on Android development specifically. And, nobody else was doing this in the early days. Today, there are fantastic YouTubers. Google's own content game has gone pretty strong, right? And the options are endless. There's just, so if you want to find out more about Android development. There's podcasts, there's videos, there's YouTube, there's courses. There's a lot of content there. But I still think there's a gap in that conversation, right? I was going through this Reddit post, I just pulled it up, that I think captures this sentiment pretty well, and it resonated with me. I'll just read out some snippets here because I feel this is just, it speaks so strongly. It's like, I feel like things were fine and everything felt under control up until about the time when they introduced Android X and Jetpack and a bunch of dependencies.
I know exactly what post you're reading.
It came up on like Android devs Reddit.
I saw this. I read this one. I was shaking my head. I was like, wow, I think I could have wrote this one.
Every statement feels gripping. I feel like since then, my Android experience went from 80% development and 20% Googling for issues to something like 40% development and 60% dealing with figuring out which dependency I need to add to my project. Or I want to make my existing app Android 15 edge-to-edge friendly, and I'll spend the next week figuring out 3 different ways to approach the system insets, with all of them seemingly clashing together, one working on one screen but breaking on another. That feeling is like visceral, but it's relatable. And I know you and I've felt and probably talked about a similar thing like this in the past. The best way I can describe this is just like, using a Star Wars reference. There's a disturbance in the force. Android development has all the tools. We have the best tools. We have Kotlin. All of it is great. And yet it feels as an Android developer that there's something lacking. In the early days, if you remember, we didn't have as many APIs. Like, it was hard. Like, Fragmented started because Android development was not as easy as like some of the other platforms. But it felt somewhat under control. And that's what that 80% development, 20% Googling, I think that resonated well. Today, I know there's like 50 options for the same thing that I'm trying to do, but somehow I feel lost. And that's where I think that the conversation is missing. My gut tells me that we don't have to accept that outcome. We have a lot of successful Android developers out there today navigating this situation. But how do they solve these everyday problems? There's an explosion of content, but we need folks to like distill all that noise and just point to the signal. Like, just directionally at a high level, how are Android developers building good product and solving real problems? I feel that conversation is missing. I don't want to find out about the next new API from Google. Like, I'm glad they're coming, but also I don't care that much about it because there's like 10 different APIs, right? I want to just talk about how real Android devs today are solving everyday problems. This is, again, something that came up. Like, what are you using for your logs? What are you using for your analytics? What are you using for crashes? I can tell you, working in a company with more funding, my options are very different. I spend a lot of time, way more time today than before on Android development. I think I mentioned this in the podcast in the past. I work with one of these products called Caper Carts at Instacart, which runs on Android OS. So I spend a lot of time on Android. I'm also building on the side an indie app. I'll have more to share in, future episodes, but I spend a lot of time there. And I realized I have to use very different solutions. And I got to imagine that's how most Android developers feel. If you work in a FAANG company, the kind of tools you have available and the solutions that you have available are probably very different from if you were like an indie developer who just wants to build a good Android app. Brass tacks, here's what's changing. I'm going to maybe shift to like shorter 15-minute episodes every other week. And the focus is going to be on like, the best way to say it is like, just understanding the zeitgeist of like Android development, like not necessarily the next API. If something, we can cover that, we might cover that. But if I'm being honest, that's not what I'm really excited about. What I'm excited about is how do I just pick Android developers and ask them, hey, how are you solving this problem? How am I solving this problem? What's top of mind? I love that phrase, top of mind. It's a very corporate thing, but it's the one corporate term that I actually like. Just sometimes knowing what's top of mind for someone can be so much more informative and uplifting than finding out every single nuance and detail. And that's how I want to shift Fragmented towards. What are the challenges that you face today? I'm sure Jetpack Compose is great. Everyone's loving how quickly you can iterate, but there's a lot of problems with it. There's performance issues. Like, what's top of mind? How do you approach these things? Because there are people building Android apps. Android app development hasn't stopped or slowed down, but it feels that signal has gotten lost in the noise of all the content that's just out there about how you should use this specific API and how this new API allows you to do something different. And I just feel like I have more to share there. We've been very privileged. We're connected with some of the best Android developers out there. I want to bring their expertise. Hopefully, Don, I can pull you back in, at one point and ask you and pepper you with more questions. So I just want to take it towards that direction so I can share those learnings with everyone else and maybe just take it in a different direction. I want to become a better Android developer and hopefully a better developer in general. What is the direction I should be thinking about? I have these problems. It's probably similar. How are the best in the industry thinking about this? And can that help me become a better Android developer? That's always been, that's why I would personally want to do it. I would listen to a podcast like that. And so that's always been our thing, right? We want to put out content that we ourselves would use. And I'm hoping that I can take it in that direction, just like a need for a fresh and like honest perspective from that lens.
I think that's a honorable thing to do because that's exactly what this industry needs. We have talked offline, and I know I've felt this way many times in my development career of wondering, how do I do something, or how is everybody else doing this? And hearing it from someone else is amazing. And I follow a lot of people on Twitter because I build, products as well that are not Android related. And I'll see like, oh, I'm using this tool to handle this, to deploy to this site, to this backend or whatever. I'm like, oh, I didn't know about that. Let me learn about this. And so I think that type of stuff is very useful for Android developers. Like, for example, a lot of Android developers don't think about the fact that if your app gets popular, you can easily DDoS your own API.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
That's things that you just don't think about when you're like, okay, I'm gonna hit the API. But yeah, you're gonna hit it every time you do X. Okay, now scale that across 20 million clients. Like, okay, now what happens to your backend? Like, that has real financial consequences. Like, how do you deal with that? Okay, well, what about when you want to, hey, I'm going to let the user upload a photo, but for whatever reason, they're in their basement and it fails. Okay, how are you persisting that so it retries later and you don't fail it out on the user? Like, these are real world problems that I think that it's going to be interesting to hear how other people, I know you have tons of other topics of how they're solving them, because that's real stuff that you can apply in your day-to-day knowledge as a developer.
Hopefully listeners are excited about this. Let me know right in. Again, this is an experiment. Every 10 episodes after recording, Don and I would have that conversation. And honestly, we were going to hit 250 and we felt that we were having a heart-to-heart and that conversation was changing. And so I'm going to apply the same principle, right? I'm going to try this for some time, see how it goes. I'm excited about it. But hopefully others are too. If they're not, that's fine too. It's an experiment. We try. But I want to give this a shot. And I think that Fragmented could take it to that place. Any other thoughts, Don? Questions? What do you think about this?
I think it's great. I think it's funny how you read that one post. That I was just reading that the other day, and I almost replied to it, but I got distracted with work stuff. And my reply was going to be like, wow, I feel like I wrote this, because the way that the author of the post wrote it, just because he even said like he or she had been working with the product Android since the early days, like I have, and I really resonated with the way that the person felt and the emotion that they had behind that post. I was like, wow, that's how I feel right now. And that kind of goes back to the original talk, why I'm deciding to move on. It's like, okay, there's a lot of frustration there that I've had, and it's never gone away. But and again, that's not the main reason. There's just a lot of other stuff that I do. But I think what you're providing here going forward, or attempting to provide, is very tactical information. And that's how I see it, like a tactical guide of like, all right, how are you doing this? And why are you doing it this way? And I would love to come back and talk to you. Like I said, that yes, do I love the web? Do I prefer the web? I do, absolutely. But does that mean I'm done writing Android apps? Absolutely not. I'm in the middle of building one right now. Yes, I'm using Flutter, but just this morning I was deep into the guts of a Flutter. I had to fork a Flutter plugin and get down into the native code of Android and Swift to fix something that the plugin author had missed. So there's still lots of stuff there. There are still apps that need to be in the native, and I think there's a lot of things that we're going to see coming out in the future, and I'm looking forward to see how to navigate it.
My friend, it's been an honor and pleasure. 250 episodes. That's quite the achievement for us.
Congratulations, Kaushik, and thank you.
Congratulations to you too. Any parting words of wisdom?
I recently had someone reach out to me, and they asked me what they should be doing with their career. They were feeling burned out. And also another person reached out to me who was very new. And the advice was actually the same. And the advice is, let your curiosity drive you. And when you're feeling burned out and you're feeling like, I don't like to do this anymore, just let your curiosity roam. And it could be, maybe you don't want to do Android or Swift or whatever you're working on, but just let it roam. Like, okay, maybe you're interested in 3D printing. Go have some fun with it. If maybe you really want to know, like, ask yourself, why does this thing work this way? And just let your curiosity go. A lot easier said than done, but I have been practicing this for quite a while now, and that has brought so much more enjoyment and joy back into my day-to-day development life, that things that I would have not cared about before, now I just find a lot of interest in, because it's just getting in and understanding it. And it just ends up being a lot of fun to just see how things work. So let your curiosity drive you at any time, and you'll end up learning a lot more and having fun with it, in my experience.
Let your curiosity roam. I love that. That's going to be my quote for the day. Can you please tell our listeners if they want to follow your journey, because you're one of the most interesting developers I've gotten to know. I've had the privilege of knowing pretty well. How can we follow your stuff? You
can always follow me online, multiple outlets. I have the same handle everywhere. It's at Don Felker. So that could be on X, could be on Instagram, can be donfelker.com is my website. I'm also considering, I've recorded a few episodes actually of myself, and I don't know if even told you this yet. I've created a few episodes of something that has a kind of a working name, and the working name is called The Legacy Code, and it's basically a podcast about building products, finding financial freedom, working for yourself, freelancing, consulting, and just building that life around software development. So
I am excited to listen to that.
I haven't released anything yet, but the plan is to, if I get enough episodes queued up, then I will release kind of a season at once. But if you are interested, or you even would like to see what I'm up to, you can join the mailing list for all that at just donfelker.com/podcast. There's a little form there. You can just drop your name in, and I'll let you know when the podcast launches, or anything else that I'm working on, such as a little fitness timer app that I'm working on. If you're into fitness and you want to know about it, you can hop over there. If not, just follow me on any of the online locations at Don Felker.
Thank you so much, Don.
How can folks reach out to you, though?
I'll be around at fragmentedpodcast.com, so folks can, sign in every 2 weeks. That's what I'm aiming for. My website is where I've consolidated most things. So if you ever want to find what I'm working on and what I've been working on, it's kau.sh. That's my website. Folks can find me there. Usually our whole thing was you do the intro and I do the outro. Don, I think for one last time, you should sign us off.
Well, Kaushik, thank you for everything. Also, to all the listeners over the years, thank you all for listening, and thank you for the comments, the kind words, everything that you have done, and thanks for just being there with us, giving us your time, and you're going to continue to give Kaushik your time, hopefully. Giving us your time is probably the most important resource that you can give us, because you can't get it back. So I want to say thank you for that. I've been very honored that you've done that. And this isn't goodbye. It's just, I'll see you later and see you around. So with that, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time.